So after Isaac was born, the family held a celebration in his honor. But we can't forget that Abraham already had a son, Ishmael, the son of his wife's slave girl, Hagar. And Hagar and Ishmael weren't too happy about this new addition to the family, so they mocked Isaac. So Sarah said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." But Abraham didn't know what to do. So God told him to listen to Sarah, and he reassured Abraham that he would take care of Ishmael and make him into a great nation as well. And the next day, Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael away. They wandered around in the desert of Beersheba until they ran out of water, and they sat down and prepared to die. But an angel shows up and tells Hagar that God will not abandon them. God then opens the eyes of Hagar, and she sees a well, and she and her son drink from it. Ishmael then grows up in the desert, and according to tradition, he becomes the father of the Arab peoples. Later in Abraham's story, Abimelech, the king he had previously tricked, shows up again. Abimelech's servants had a dispute with Abraham over who owned a certain well, so the two men made a deal that they would do no harm to each other, and Abimelech also makes Abraham promise that he will never again deal falsely with him or his descendants. In exchange for the rights to the well, Abraham gave Abimelech a gift of 7 lambs. This location came to be known as Beersheba, which can mean Well of 7 or Well of the Oath. Although, in Genesis 26, the one who makes the treaty with Abimelech at Beersheba is said to be Isaac. In chapter 22, God tells Abraham to take his son Isaac to the region of Moriah and to sacrifice him on a mountain there as a burnt offering. So the next morning, Abraham, Isaac, and 2 servants set out for Moriah, and after 3 days they arrive. The servants stay behind as Abraham and Isaac go up to the mountain to worship. Isaac carries the wood for the sacrifice on his own back, while Abraham carries the knife and the fire. And Isaac says, "The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham answers, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." At the top of the mountain, Abraham builds an altar, ties up Isaac, and puts him on it. Abraham is about to stab his son when the angel of the Lord begins shouting his name, saying, "Don't lay a hand on the boy, don't do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Suddenly, Abraham spots a ram caught by its horns in a thicket, and Abraham sacrifices it in the place of Isaac. Abraham then names the place Adonai Yireh, meaning the Lord will provide. Throughout history, the Jews would quote a saying that said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." So several things are going on here. 1. God is testing Abraham's faith and obedience, but he is also proving himself to be a faithful God, even in the midst of confusing and difficult circumstances where he seems like he's not as faithful as we would like him to be. 2. God is actually condemning the child sacrifice that took place in the neighboring Canaanite cults by distinguishing himself from the ways of those other gods. 3. God is fulfilling his promise from his covenant with Abraham that he himself would take on the consequences of the sins of Abraham and his children. 4. Animal sacrifice is now seen as a way of reminding both God and humans that God has promised to bear the punishment of sin upon himself. And 5. The mountain of Moriah is the location of what would later become Jerusalem, which is where Jesus, God as a human, was put to death for the sins of all people. So after this event, the text says that Sarah lived to be 127 years old, and then she died, and Abraham mourned for her. But Abraham didn't own any land on which to bury her, so he went to the Hittites and bought a field with a cave in it from them, and there he buried his wife. Isaac was now 40 years old, and he was very sad and lonely after his mother's death, so Abraham sent his servant to go look for a wife for Isaac among his relatives in Padan Aram. The servant arrived at the well of Padan Aram and began to pray for God's help. He prayed for a sign that a girl would come to the well and give him a drink, and then offer to water his camels as well, and then he would know that she was the one for Isaac. And a girl arrived at the well and did just that. The girl's name was Rebekah. Her brother was named Laban, but we'll hear more about him later. So the family arranged the marriage, celebrated, and sent Rebekah off with the servant. Back in Canaan, Isaac is sitting in a field meditating when he sees in the distance his father's servant returning with Rebekah. And Isaac and Rebekah were married, and he loved her, and she was a friend to him after his mother's death. Sometime after the death of Sarah, Abraham had another wife named Keturah, who bore him many sons. The text says that Abraham gave gifts to them all and sent them off to live in the lands of the east, far away from Isaac. And when Abraham died at the age of 175, his entire inheritance was given to Isaac, and together Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave next to Sarah.